Hello and welcome to another view from Mayor Brown. This sits alongside our regular podcast and is an occasional series of interviews with those involved in the changes going on in employment law. The podcast is presented by Nicholas Robertson, the head of Mayor Brown's London employment team. At the end of the podcast, we will explain how to get in touch if you have any comments or questions.
Hello and welcome to another View from Mayor Brown, a special guest podcast edition, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Liz Stern. Liz, as those of you who will know who've listened to our previous episode with her, head of our global immigration team based in Washington DC. She's over here visiting clients, and we did a really interesting seminar, a Brexit related seminar, but with a sort of wider perspective as well on global mobility. So Liz, delighted you could join us today.
I'm so pleased to be here, Nick.
And we thought we'd talk about US immigration policy, because my sense is that immigration policy in the US seems to be in the eye of the storm, and there's a lot of political turmoil going on, whichever side of the divide you're on. But it seems to me that immigration is an intensely political issue at the moment. It's a Trump battleground. Just starting there, is that the right sort of way of looking at it, do you think?
It is, Nick. We heard it during the campaign leading up, but to me, really during the inaugural speech, when President Trump first said that the policy of his administration was encapsulated in 4 words: Buy American, Hire American, I knew at that moment that immigration was going to be top of the heap. And it has been. It has remained there. And a week after the inauguration, when the first travel ban was issued that caused so much controversy, the president definitely cemented the fact that he was serious about taking on the immigration battle on multiple levels.
So before we talk through the travel bans and what's been happening, let's start with a really basic question. Why is this such an important area for businesses in the US?
Yes. It's clear that this particular administration has decided to take on things in a revolutionary way that in the past were handled according to much more regulatory and therefore more modestly affecting controls and standards. This administration is looking at reform of immigration to redefine, to protect the American workforce. And that creates a whole new playing field that employers may not have prepared for and now need to catch up quickly.
So if I take the view, if I summarise it by saying the system is now, there's an element that is intended to obstruct immigration rather than regulate it, it's to obstruct it. It's starting from a point that business immigration is not a good thing and is to be curtailed. Is that a fair summary of what you're seeing? And as I say, we're going to get into the detail in a second.
Yes, not exactly. It certainly can sound that way at surface level, but in reality, the Trump administration has left room for businesses to bring over what we would think of as the truly highly skilled,
right,
that bring an enrichment to the workforce, as opposed to in any way people that might seem highly skilled, but their wage levels and their skills levels are sufficiently generic that American workers could fill those jobs.
Right.
So there's a certain elitism within the Trump administration that could benefit certain businesses if they position themselves to play to that particular policy. It's not all things no, it's many things no.
Okay, good. Well, look, let's talk about the first. We must be about 120 days in by now to the presidency. So talk us through the twists and turns since that Buy American, Hire American inauguration speech, because it seems that hardly a week's gone by without, on this side of the pond at least, US immigration policy being one of the lead items.
That's right. Well, it has been extremely active. We are very much on the cutting edge of coverage of these events for our clients, because beginning with the travel ban, the first travel ban 1.0, I would say on January 27th, the business community needed advice at the highest level, at the C-suite level, of heads of business, heads of HR, the general counsel, the chief of security, on how to advise their executives and professionals that were traveling around the globe and might either be trapped or become trapped if they were unwise in their judgment of leaving after it took effect. How do you stem panic and yet at the same time create some controls within the business so you mitigate the volume of damage and at the same time give support. That's what it started with. And what that probably indicated in a bigger picture is that the Trump administration is happy to be bold, to take bold action that other administrations have not, regardless of how controversial it is. But following that, the focus has been probably more pointed on how businesses use immigration and to what extent they're relying on a workforce, whether it's through their own employees or through their vendors, that isn't quite highly skilled enough. And those reforms have occurred more recently from the late February into early April timeframe. And they can be synthesized in a anti-fraud and anti-abuse posture of even the immigration benefit agencies, speaking to, we will look at what abuses employers have before we look at what eligibility they might have for their candidates. It's clearly that is the number one concern.
Right. Interesting. So travel ban 1.0 gets overturned, and then there's another go round.
Travel ban 1.0 was suspended.
Right.
It wasn't overturned, but it clearly was headed towards that.
Right.
Trump administration elects to issue travel ban 2.0, which was a much better crafted travel ban. Clearly had the benefit of advisors that have careers in this area, and crafted it in a way that should have allowed it to be sustained. But the challenge is because of the irritation that the first travel ban created, and the fact that it really did seem quite targeted to the Muslim community in countries selected by the Trump administration that had not had actual terrorists discovered in the United States, created the backlash. And now that's in litigation. So travel ban 2.0 is suspended. But I mention again that the integrity of the law behind that travel ban, it will be difficult to challenge. It's a political challenge more than a legal challenge. Then the biggest visa category in the U.S., or the most visible one, was getting ready to get started for the new fiscal year on April 1.
Yes.
And in advance of that, the Trump administration had its agencies take 5 separate actions to make clear that this was not going to be your ordinary visa application year. They suspended expedited processing for this particular visa category, the H-1B, i.e. extreme vetting will occur. They eliminated a long-standing policy, and indeed reversed it, that computer programmers at entry level could, along with other IT professionals, qualify. And then they issued anti-fraud, anti-abuse guidance, both by the Immigration Benefits Agency, by Department of Labor, and by Department of Justice, making it clear that intra-agency collaboration to prosecute employers that abuse could occur.
Goodness me. Sounds as if the goalposts are being shifted, there may still be goals, but the goalposts are being shifted. Sounds like the goal is getting smaller as well the whole time.
Yes.
And this must be causing significant concern for businesses either located in the US or wanting to send people into the US for the purposes of work.
It is. It's actually causing what I would call a bifurcated reaction. To some extent, businesses are shying away from saying maybe we shouldn't rely on immigrant talent too much, because it seems like more trouble than it's worth. But to another extent, they're thinking, but you know what? We still have our business objectives, and perhaps what we should do instead is accelerate immigration benefits by doing things like sponsoring workers for permanent residency much sooner than one would otherwise, because permanent residents are more protected under the Trump administration and the laws generally than non-immigrants.
Interesting. Okay. So Travel ban 2.0 is in litigation. Employers are scrambling either to downplay their reliance on immigrant labour or to accelerate it, as you say. Where do you see things going in the next, let's say, 3 to 6 months? And I appreciate with this presidency that may be a bit of a hospital pass to ask you that. well, Nick, I know exactly what's going to happen. But no, seriously, where do you think this administration is going to go? Or do you think that having made life more difficult for all but the elite immigrant, if I can put it in those terms, they will feel, well, that's job done, we'll go off and do something else? Where do you see that going?
I think this administration will deliberately pick winners and losers. They will be looking for some losers that make headline stories that are so distasteful that it will create enough political furor that Congress will have the opportunity to legislate changes that impose higher skills and higher wage protections into the workforce, so that only employers that bring over that high caliber of foreign worker will benefit from it.
So when you talk about winners and losers, sorry to interrupt, when you talk about winners and losers, you're talking about actual employers, individual employers. Someone is, there's going to be a head on a spike.
There will. And it's needed, because otherwise Congress has failed to be able to pass immigration reform of the type that I'm talking about for many years now, certainly for the past 7 years. The most recent vivid memory is when the Gang of Eight in the Senate tried to pass immigration reform and failed. And Trump is very aware of that, and I think will want the story. And the story will most likely be similar to the story that was passed on Disney and Southern California Edison and other companies over the past 2 years, where the Obama administration, however, did not really take this on, when an employer is having foreign workers, including of a vendor, train their replacement, have the U.S. workers train their replacement foreign workers, and they create these vivid pathos stories in the media. That's the kind of head on the spike that we anticipate. But there will be winners as well, as I mentioned, and the winners will be employers that are prepared, that make it clear in what they file every day that they are in compliance and giving some respect to the Hire American policy, regardless of their political views on it. They simply are giving deference to it. And those employers will probably be given the benefit of actually being able to bring people in more fluidly, but only if they don't veer from staying above a certain skills level and above a certain wage level.
So the for employers who up until now will have relied on temporary or long-term assistance from immigrant labour, if I can use that term, are going to have to find other ways of doing that, because that route is going to become increasingly difficult.
I think so. I think what will happen is businesses will adapt. There's already a significant focus on whether those kind of lower skilled jobs, there's a combination of insourcing within the United States in low-cost centers and more offshoring. But there's also, interestingly, a greater reliance on artificial intelligence and a greater support for AI development, which is quite interesting, for the things that could be replicated. So to some extent, this might almost stimulate an acceleration of a trend that would have happened anyway.
Yes.
At some point, you stop going through the trouble of importing that kind of labor. It's just more trouble than it's worth. You're going to create these other innovative developments. But of course, they're still in pilot mode, so there'll be some bumps with it.
There'll be some time, and of course it's a 4-year term, so who knows what will happen more than 4 years down the line. But the way you talk about immigration reform, is there a groundswell of opinion generally within the US that would favour immigration reform? This isn't whilst these particular policies may be reflective of a political viewpoint. Generally, there is a view that says protecting American jobs, the system has gone too far at the moment. Is that?
I think it's probably not as extreme or as I would say as linear as perhaps the Trump administration has made it. For example, Senator Hatch, a longstanding leader in our Senate, has still proposed that he will continue with opportunities for technology companies to continue to import high-skilled labor and actually go in the other direction, not fully, but to some extent. So I would say that there's still some division. That's exactly why the Trump administration wants to head on the spike story, because
to create
that
the groundswell.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Okay, cool. Good, okay. Well, that, Liz, it sounds like at this stage there's quite a lot for employers to think about, and planning and foresight is everything, and then being prepared to react if there are radical changes of direction or developments with US immigration policy.
Exactly. What we're advising clients is to kind of take a three-pronged attack. One is to make sure that they're getting their information on what's happening from a reliable source, and typically a central source, because as usual, the way that stories are being shared, with all the best of intentions, is chaotic to some extent in the middle of this, and how fast-paced it is.
Do you have a reliable source in mind, Liz?
Oh, I do indeed.
I thought you might have a reliable source in mind, Liz.
I'm thinking of Mayor Brown. I don't know, but really it might be a combination. I think some of the in-house government relations teams have their finger on the pulse of this, but it really is important to make sure they cut through the noise. The second aspect is to review the compliance programs much more critically than they have before, to look at their compliance program in an innovative way to make sure that if they are audited through some of the aggressive site visits that we expect, much more aggressive than the Obama administration, they are more than prepared. And this particular bureaucracy loves checklists, and the checklist has to be enhanced from what it was before. And then the third thing is to really do some business planning as to what the staffing needs are for the next 3 years, and to try to forecast out and educate the businesses on how to use immigrant talent, because some things that may have continued to happen simply through inertia may not be as good, but there may be others that they actually want to capitalize on, and why not?
So in terms of the audit, just going back to the middle of those 3 points, the US employers can expect audit inspections.
Yes.
And if they take the same approach to toughening up the audits that they've taken with granting permission in the first team when people are seeking to bring people into the US, you can expect those to be more hostile, my term again, in terms of the approach. We want to find fault, we want to find things that aren't done right, so therefore the onus is on employers to be squeaky clean.
That's right. I think they'll be selective. I think they'll have to find the germ in order to be able to say, this is the company we're going to drill down on. So what you want to do is avoid being the one that's drilled down into. But once they drill down, it's very clear that Department of Homeland Security, which is where the Immigration Benefits Agency sits, Department of Labor and Department of Justice are going to collaborate together. That collaboration is the scary part.
Yes.
Because it elevates things to the investigative level as opposed to the audit level, including criminal prosecution.
So there are criminal sanctions if
there are.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
they'll try to bring a fraud action. They'll try to bring a RICO action. They'll bring it in those ways. It'll be much more aggressive, but only for the ones that they go past that superficial layer, if you will.
So time spent now self-auditing almost.
Yes.
To try and identify quite how comfortable you are as an employer with your records, with your record keeping, with what you're doing. Maybe time well spent.
Absolutely. You want to show that absolutely gift wrap package to the auditor that you certainly aren't the company to worry about. That's exactly what you want to be prepared to greet them. Not unprepared, not skittish, not suddenly caught with records missing or a record that shows the wrong thing.
And tell me, do you get any warning there's going to be an audit, or do people literally turn up at 9 a.m. and knock on the door and say, we'd like to see your records?
They show up by surprise, but often they will give you 3 days to be able to turn over records, or at least they did in the former administration. So we'll see what they do now. We'll see whether they're as easygoing about it, or whether the agencies themselves feel that in this sort of mindset, they should be much more aggressive and not tolerant of a waiting period.
Gosh.
Yes.
Interesting times. Well, I go back to where I started this, which is it's felt like that immigration, it is a Trump battleground, but it's felt like it's been at the eye of the storm. And I imagine it's been a fairly entertaining 120 days for you and your team, Liz.
It has.
Thing after thing coming out, and presumably lots and lots of phone calls from employers wanting to know, how do we react and where do we go next?
We do, and we really are trying to be very practical, because I think in this mindset you can also be too alarmist. There actually can be very, very practical approaches to prepare for this, even though it's scary. But again, to get away from it, having that balance requires constant vigilance. It really does.
Well, I think one of the things I notice, and I've read some of the alerts and updates that your team have put out, is it's terribly easy to write an alert or an update that says, this has happened, you should be extremely worried, please call me and I'll talk about what to do. Actually, it's much more constructive and much more nuanced and balanced than what we're trying to say. So.
Yes. So we've aimed to do that, and I think it's serious for employers. And talking to some of the employees that they deal with and the level of panic that they feel, there's also an empathetic part that you think they really do need to get messaging out that helps them to avoid that, just from a humane aspect in addition to a productivity aspect.
It's really interesting. It goes back to a conversation we were having about Brexit in the seminar yesterday, in fact, about the need for an effective communications programme. You're absolutely right. I was thinking of this in terms of employers must be worried, employers must be thinking, how do we get people into the US to do... And actually, employers it's the people involved that you're asking to do a day job, and they may be thinking, well, if I get sent out on a business trip will I get back into the US again?
Exactly.
And it's
Exactly.
for them to have a communications program that says, we, the employer, are doing this and looking after you in this way.
Exactly. Absolutely right. Exactly right. And having those communications, I think, have yielded actually greater loyalty from employees for the employers that are actively getting in front of it.
Goodness. Okay, well, it sounds like it'll be an interesting remainder of 2017. So I doubt the pace of change will slow down. But perhaps when you're next back over, I think we're talking about autumn, aren't we? You're going to be back over in autumn for the next of the global mobility seminars that we're doing. Then we can have an update, because I think it's unlikely that you'll be going, no, nothing's changed.
No, I think we'll see a progression. That's
Yes.
that's clear. A progression will occur, but it'll be in the same direction. Yes.
Yes. Oh, no, I don't think anyone's going to predict suddenly it's going to be, hey, open borders, send me your poor huddled masses. I don't think that's going to be the policy at all. So listen, last time we were here, I asked you about a favourite piece of music. I remember that fantastic story you told about why the particular music was your favourite piece of music. So I thought I'd spring something slightly different on you this time, which is to say, TV series. Let's go. Best TV series you've ever watched. Go on, start it for 10, and I'll fight you if you get the answer wrong.
Well, I've thought about it quite a lot, because there are so many good TV series now. But I'd say that probably one of my favorites, I'm not sure if it's the all-time favorite, but it's certainly high up there, is Sports Night. It was one of the first Aaron Sorkin miniseries, or series, I should say. It's when the talking while you're walking began. But it was a very, very clever dialogue. It ended up being only 2 seasons because it was slightly ahead of its time.
Right.
And the public, they were impatient with having to follow the dialogue. But if you watch it from start to finish, it is such a well thought out series. It is all about human relations. It is broadcasting, sports news, and it is headed by a woman producer, which is very interesting to watch sort of her attempts to manage her workforce and to deal with the threat of acquisition for the particular studio. Very, very interesting series. I loved it. I thought it was great. It got a few of the actors in there got their start there, so you'll recognize them right away. But it's not as well known as The West Wing, which I also love, or Newsroom more recently. It's excellent. Absolutely well done.
Fascinating. As a long-term devotee of The West Wing, while Aaron Sorkin was writing it, I can relate to that. I was actually watching an episode of The West Wing the other day. It was on TV, and thinking actually how difficult it is to watch it now, given the changes that have happened since. The dramatic premise of this sort of white shining knight who's in the president's in the Oval Office is difficult to sort of buy it in the same way. So,
I think you might be right about that. It's very much more House of Cards now, isn't it? Yeah.
Yes. There we go. Liz, listen, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much indeed. And I think it's really interesting just to get that perspective, because from what we see in the UK, you get the newspaper stories and they only give you particular aspects. And for businesses that are having to operate in that environment, I think it's a very different and very difficult situation indeed. So thank you.
It was a pleasure as always, Nick.
Cool. Till the next time then.
So that concludes this podcast. We hope that you find it and others in this special Another View series helpful. If you have any comments or questions, please email Nick at nrobertson@mayorbrown.com. This podcast is an overview of the cases and law, and how the law will apply in any particular case will depend on the individual circumstances. Listeners should seek legal advice if any of the matters discussed are relevant to a specific issue or concern. Thanks for listening.